Mythology is the vehicle which carries stories of our past and delivers them into the present. Myth often recounts the chronicles of the gods. Their tales are passed from generation to generation through oral traditions until they were finally carved into stone or written on cloth, skins, bark, paper, or papyrus. In the Western world, stories of the gods such as Zeus, Osiris, Thor, and Enki were once accepted as true recollections of our past. The rise of the Catholic Church caused our belief in these stories to decline. The gods who once ruled the skies, the waters, and the underworld were no longer viewed as supreme and almighty beings. They were transformed from being omnipotent masters who ruled the skies and walked the earth into unexplainable aspects of the natural world. Some scholars contend the myths we have today, even in their most archaic form, are creations of a vivid imagination, and the stories are simply flights of fantasy. Did our ancestors sit around a campfire conjuring up wild tales to describe the nature of lightning and other natural phenomena? Did they give these forces human characteristics, including distinct personalities and well-defined behaviors? Then, based upon what emerged, were these fantastic tales told and retold to a point that an entire religion and culture grew around them? Other stories, like ghost stories, were also told around the campfire in deep antiquity and never gained the same prominence as these supposed stories about nature. There are also a number of researchers who conclude that the gods were living, breathing individuals in our remote past. Tales that describe their exploits and achievements grew until they ultimately achieved godlike status. The gods we find in mythology were not mortal men, but immortal beings with lifetimes that extended far beyond our own. In the narratives we have inherited, they are portrayed as having amazing weapons capable of leveling mountains, smiting their enemies, and putting fear into the hearts and minds of the other gods. They are depicted as flying through the skies over incredible distances in their celestial chariots. And instead of being a peaceful, loving God like we imagine today, the gods of myth were constantly fighting amongst themselves, vying for ultimate power and control. It's hard to imagine our ancestors creating these wild yarns. When we look to legends based upon historic individuals, we do not find the same kind of grandiose, godlike portrayal. In the legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Arthur is never afforded supernatural skills. Stories surrounding him are filled with tales of brave knights and their noble deeds. Arthur is assisted in his journeys and plights by Merlin the magician, who used spells and potions to assist his royal compatriot. Even in this rich mythological lore, we do not find tools and weapons that to this day confound the modern reader with their incredible power and abilities. What could our ancestors have drawn upon to come up with these magnificent and detailed accounts? What did they know of flying machines or high-tech weapons? The flippant justifications mentioned earlier that degrade our ancestors' observational skills and integrity do not explain one major point. Why would ancient chroniclers make up and memorize word for word such far-fetched and far-reaching stories, and then pass them down from generation to generation? These stories were never portrayed as a work of fiction. They were described as being true factual accounts of our past. Is it possible the stories we have of the gods are true? A number of factors support this possibility. First are the narratives of the myths themselves. When myths discussing the earliest periods of time are laid out side by side, one remarkable fact immediately surfaces. There is an uncanny degree of commonality in the narratives when the legends from different cultures are compared. Take the biblical account of Noah's flood. It is estimated that there are over 500 flood legends worldwide. Theoretically speaking, if the floods recorded by cultures ranging from North America to Australia were independent events, then the stories they tell by their very nature would be inherently different. Flooding caused by a hurricane would naturally be experienced and described differently from a flood resulting from a tsunami. In turn, a disastrous and uncharacteristic rise in the level of the Nile during its annual rainy season should on all accounts be recorded in a very distinct way as well. Elements of the story, including the people involved, the cause of the flood, the means of their survival, and the identification of those who lived through this tragedy would each be different. Interestingly, this is not what we find. In a nutshell, myth recalls there was a pious, virtuous, or righteous man who is warned of an impending flood. He builds a boat, an ark, digs a canoe, climbs on a log, a leaf, a reed, or climbs to the top of a tree or mountain to escape the rising waters. He survives this disaster with his wife, his sister, or several other family members. In some stories, animals are taken onto the boat or climb to the top of the mountain. There are also several instances that relate how an animal, such as a bird, is released in order to assess whether dry land has appeared. This eerie parallel is not the only one we find when comparing myths. They are constantly found in the stories of our past to a point that seems statistically impossible. Continuing on, using the flood narrative as an example, the only explanation that could account for the commonality of this myth is that cultures from around the world are all telling the same story. Could the flood have occurred in one geographical area, and the survivors then spread out to repopulate the world? We know from the archaeological record that Australia was populated roughly 60,000 years ago. This date would imply that the flood would have had to occur prior to human habitation in that region. Did a flood occur somewhere on the Earth some 60,000 years ago, and their survivors then spread across the globe and shared their amazing brush with death? It's possible, although highly unlikely. One thing to consider when evaluating these ancient texts is who wrote the story. One way to help determine the authorship of these stories is to look at the perspective through which the myth itself is told. Geraldine Woods, in her book AP Literature and Composition for Dummies, states, "Literature provides a lens through which readers look at the world. Point of view is the way the author allows you to see and hear what's going on. An author's point of view can provide us with insights into his psyche. It is the lens through which he views the world. Every author's voice is unique. It sets the tone of the work. Each author uses a different vocabulary, a different set of values, and a different set of priorities as they relay their thoughts and ideas. A soldier who survives a fierce battle in a war-torn country would describe his experiences differently than someone at home who sees the carnage on television. The soldier might see his participation as part of a day's work, while the observer might feel horrified, appalled, or grief-stricken at the events that are transpiring. Their thoughts, feelings, and perspective of the event would be vastly different. A quick survey into some of our mythic literature may provide insights into the mindset of our ancestors.